What happens when a Hollywood director known for speaking her mind sits across from a political commentator who refuses to back down? Live on daytime television. That's exactly the moment viewers witnessed when Olivia Wilde walked onto the set of The View and found herself in an unexpected clash with Alyssa Farah Griffin. Make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The cameras are rolling, the studio audience is clapping, and the energy already feels a little different than usual. Whoopi Goldberg looks down the table with that knowing smile she gets when she senses the conversation might go somewhere unpredictable. "All right, we're back," Whoopi says, turning toward the guest chair. Joining us today is actress and director Olivia Wilde. Her latest project has people talking everywhere, and she's here with us this morning. Olivia, welcome to the show. The audience cheers as Olivia walks out, smiling and waving. She hugs Whoopi, then greets Joy Behar, Sunny Hostin, Sarah Haynes, and Alyssa Farah Griffin before taking her seat. "Thank you for having me," Olivia says, settling in. "I'm excited to be here. I've watched you guys for years." Joy laughs. "Careful, that might make us feel old." The audience chuckles. Whoopi leans forward. "So, Olivia, you've been promoting your new film, and in a few interviews you've also been talking about the current political climate in Hollywood and beyond. You've been pretty vocal lately." Olivia nods. "Yeah, it's hard not to be. I think artists have always responded to what's happening around them." Sunny jumps in. "And you said something interesting recently about how celebrities sometimes get criticized for speaking about politics." Olivia nods again. "Right. I said that people often say, stay in your lane. But historically, artists, filmmakers, musicians, they've always been part of political conversations." Sarah leans in with curiosity. "Do you ever worry about backlash when you talk about those things publicly?" Olivia smiles slightly. "Backlash is kind of part of the deal now. If you say anything, someone will disagree. That's just the reality of social media." The audience murmurs in agreement. But Alyssa Farah Griffin shifts in her chair slightly, already looking like she has something on her mind. "Can I jump in on that?" Alyssa says. Whoopi gestures toward her. "Go ahead." Alyssa turns toward Olivia politely but directly. "I agree that artists have historically spoken about politics," she says. "But sometimes the criticism people have isn't that celebrities are speaking. It's that they're speaking from a place that can feel disconnected from everyday Americans." The audience reacts with a mix of murmurs and a few claps. Olivia raises an eyebrow slightly, but keeps her tone calm. "What do you mean by disconnected?" she asks. Alyssa nods as if she expected the question. "Well, for example," she says, "when people in Hollywood talk about policy or economic issues, there's sometimes a perception that they're not dealing with the same realities as people who are working multiple jobs or struggling with inflation." Joy leans back with a half smile. "Oh boy, we're starting early today." The audience laughs. Olivia tilts her head slightly toward Alyssa. "I actually understand that criticism," Olivia says. "But I think it's a bit of a misconception that people in the arts are somehow removed from reality. Many of us didn't grow up wealthy. Many of us worked our way into this industry." Alyssa nods politely but doesn't back down. "Sure, and I respect that," she replies. "But when someone with millions of followers tells people how they should vote or what policies they should support, some viewers feel like they're being lectured." The audience reacts again, this time louder. Sunny immediately leans forward. "But Alyssa," Sunny says, "politicians, commentators, journalists, everyone shares their perspective. Why should celebrities be the one group that's told to stay quiet?" Alyssa turns toward Sunny. "I'm not saying stay quiet. I'm saying sometimes the tone matters." Olivia looks between them, clearly listening carefully. "What tone do you think celebrities should use?" Olivia asks. Alyssa pauses for a moment. "I think it helps when there's humility," she says. "When it's less, this is what you should think, and more, here's my perspective." Joy jumps in. "To be fair, that advice probably applies to politicians too." The audience laughs and claps. Whoopi nods. "That's true." Olivia chuckles lightly, but then turns back to Alyssa. "I actually agree with humility," she says. "But I also think people sometimes assume that when someone from Hollywood speaks about issues, they must be out of touch. And that assumption itself can shut down conversation." Alyssa nods slowly. "But do you think Hollywood sometimes creates its own bubble?" she asks. The question lands with a noticeable shift in the room. Sarah glances between them, sensing the tension building. Olivia pauses before answering. "I think every industry has bubbles," she says. "Politics definitely does. The audience reacts with a few laughs and claps. Alyssa smiles slightly but pushes back. That's fair, she says. But Hollywood is also incredibly influential culturally. When certain viewpoints dominate in that space, it can feel like there isn't room for other perspectives. Sunny shakes her head slightly. But that's true of many spaces, she says. Corporate boardrooms, political institutions. Alyssa raises her hand slightly. I agree with that, she says. But we're talking about Hollywood right now. Olivia leans forward a bit, clearly more engaged now. I actually think there are more diverse perspectives in Hollywood than people realize, she says. But the media often highlights the loudest voices. Joy smirks. Well, loud voices are kind of our business. The audience laughs again, breaking the tension briefly. But Alyssa looks thoughtful. I hear what you're saying, she says to Olivia. But I think a lot of viewers feel like when celebrities talk about politics, they're sometimes dismissing people who disagree with them. Olivia's expression shifts slightly. Dismissive how? She asks. Alyssa answers carefully. Sometimes it can come across like, if you don't agree with this position, you're morally wrong. The audience gets quieter now. Olivia exhales softly. I think that accusation goes both ways, she says. Plenty of public figures on the other side say the same thing. Whoopi raises her hand slightly. Let me jump in for a second, she says. Because this is actually a really interesting conversation. The audience applauds. Whoopi looks between Olivia and Alyssa. You're both making points people talk about at home all the time, she says. The question is, where does that conversation become productive, and where does it become a fight? Joy nods. Or Twitter. The audience laughs loudly. But Alyssa leans forward again, still focused on Olivia. I'm genuinely curious, she says. When you speak out politically, do you think about how someone who disagrees with you might hear it? Olivia doesn't hesitate. Yes, she says. But I also think silence isn't the answer. The audience claps. Alyssa nods slowly. I don't think silence is the answer either, she says. There's a brief pause between them. And then Alyssa adds something that instantly changes the tone of the table. But I do think sometimes celebrities underestimate how their words land outside their own circles. The audience murmurs again. Olivia's posture straightens slightly. What do you mean by that? She asks. Alyssa meets her gaze. Well, she says calmly, some of your recent comments about voters and political issues sparked backlash. And I think part of that reaction came from people feeling like they were being judged. The studio goes noticeably quieter. Joy looks from Olivia to Alyssa like she knows exactly where this is heading. And Olivia Wilde takes a breath before responding. Because suddenly, the friendly interview has turned into something much more serious, and everyone at the table can feel it. Olivia sits back slightly for a moment, clearly thinking about how she wants to respond. The room feels a little quieter than it did just seconds ago. The audience can sense that the conversation has shifted from a casual discussion to something more personal. She finally speaks. Well, Olivia says calmly, I think context matters a lot with things like that. A lot of times a quote gets pulled out of a much bigger conversation. Alyssa nods but doesn't look convinced yet. Sure, she says. That definitely happens. But sometimes the full interview is out there, and people still feel the same way about what was said. A small murmur runs through the audience. Joy raises her eyebrows slightly, watching both of them carefully. Olivia leans forward a little. I'm always open to hearing criticism, she says. But I do think there's a pattern where women in entertainment, especially when they speak strongly about issues, get labeled as out of touch or lecturing. Sunny nods immediately. That's true, Sunny says. We've seen that happen a lot. Raises a hand slightly, trying to clarify. I'm not saying that's what you were doing, she says quickly. I'm just saying there's a perception sometimes. Olivia gives a small smile. But perception is often shaped by how conversations are framed, she says. And sometimes those frames are selective. The audience reacts with a few claps. Joy chuckles softly. Selective is a polite word for it. The audience laughs again, easing the tension just a little. But Alyssa keeps the conversation going. Let me ask you this, she says. Do you think Hollywood sometimes assumes that if someone disagrees politically, it must be because they're uninformed? That question gets a louder reaction from the audience. Some people clap. Others murmur. Sarah looks over at Whoopi with a slight, here we go expression. Olivia takes a second before answering. I think there are definitely people who make that assumption, she says. But I also think that assumption exists in every political space. Alyssa nods slowly. That's fair, she says. There's a short pause. But then Alyssa adds something that pushes the discussion further. But I've also seen interviews where celebrities talk about voters in ways that sound dismissive. The audience reacts again. Sunny leans toward Alyssa. Can you give an example? She asks. Alyssa looks back at Olivia before speaking. Well, Olivia mentioned recently that certain political movements rely heavily on misinformation and fear, Alyssa says. And a lot of people who support those movements felt like they were being painted as ignorant. Olivia exhales quietly. I didn't say voters were ignorant, she replies. Alyssa nods. I know you didn't use that word, she says. But some people felt the implication. The audience murmurs again. Joy leans forward, clearly interested now. But Alyssa, Joy says, politicians say far harsher things about voters all the time. The audience claps. Alyssa smiles slightly. That's true, she says. And I criticize that too. Sunny adds quickly. But celebrities get told to stay quiet in a way politicians don't. Alyssa nods again. I agree there's a double standard sometimes, she says. Olivia listens carefully, then jumps back in. I actually think what's happening is that we're in a moment where everyone feels judged, she says. No matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. The audience quiets down to listen. And social media amplifies that feeling, Olivia continues. People see one sentence, they assume the worst interpretation, and suddenly a conversation turns into a headline. Sarah nods thoughtfully. That happens a lot, she says. But Alyssa gently pushes back again. I agree headlines can distort things, she says. But sometimes the comments themselves are what people react to. Olivia looks directly at her. Do you think people in politics always speak carefully about the people they disagree with? She asks. The audience laughs softly. Alyssa smiles. Not always, she admits. Joy jumps in immediately. That's the understatement of the year. More laughter from the audience. But Alyssa keeps her tone calm. I'm just saying when someone has a big platform, there's a responsibility that comes with it. Olivia nods slowly. I agree with that, she says. There's a small pause. But I also think responsibility includes speaking honestly about what you believe, Olivia adds. The audience claps again. Sunny nods firmly. Yes, she says. Exactly. But Alyssa isn't finished yet. Absolutely, she says. But honesty can sometimes come across as judgment. Olivia's expression becomes a little more serious. I think disagreement often gets interpreted as judgment, she replies. The audience murmurs again. Whoopi finally leans forward, placing her hands on the table. Let me say something, she says calmly. The table quiets immediately. This conversation right here, Whoopi continues, is exactly the kind of conversation people should be having. Because the truth is, everyone feels like the other side is talking down to them. The audience claps. Whoopi gestures between Olivia and Alyssa. You've got someone from Hollywood and someone from the political world sitting here, both saying the same thing in different ways, she says. Joy nods. And neither of them wants to be told to shut up. More laughter. But Alyssa looks back at Olivia with another question. Can I ask something a little more direct? She says. Olivia nods. Sure. Alyssa pauses briefly before speaking. When celebrities talk about certain voters being misled or manipulated, she says, do you worry that people hearing that might feel insulted? The audience grows quiet again. Olivia thinks for a moment. I worry about a lot of things when I speak publicly, she says. She continues calmly. But I also worry about misinformation itself. Because misinformation can genuinely harm people. Sunny nods strongly. Yes, Sunny says. We've seen that with health issues, elections, all kinds of things. Alyssa responds quickly. But who decides what counts as misinformation? That question sparks a louder reaction from the audience. Some clap. Some murmur. Joy whistles softly. Oh boy, she says. Olivia leans forward slightly. Facts decide that, she says. A few audience members clap immediately. But Alyssa responds just as quickly. Sometimes facts are debated, though, she says. Sunny shakes her head. No, she says firmly. Evidence can be debated, interpretation can be debated, but facts themselves aren't opinions. The audience applauds loudly. The tension at the table is clearly rising now. Sarah glances at Whoopi again. Whoopi watches carefully, letting the conversation continue, but clearly ready to step in if it gets too heated. Olivia looks back at Alyssa. I think we all agree misinformation is a real problem, she says. Alyssa nods. Yes, she says. but sometimes labeling something misinformation can shut down legitimate questions. The audience murmurs again. Joy tilts her head. But sometimes those questions are conspiracy theories, she says bluntly. Laughter and applause fill the room. Alyssa smiles but holds her ground. That happens, she says. But not every disagreement is a conspiracy theory. Olivia nods slowly. I actually agree with that, she says. There's a brief pause. And then Olivia adds something that shifts the energy again. But I also think some political figures have deliberately spread misinformation, she says. The audience reacts immediately. A few people clap loudly. Others murmur. Alyssa looks directly at Olivia. Are you talking about specific politicians? She asks. Olivia shrugs slightly. I think there are plenty of examples, she says. The room grows quieter again. And suddenly the conversation feels like it's about to cross from a debate about media and celebrity influence into something even more direct. Joy leans back slowly. Okay, she says under her breath. Because everyone at the table can feel the conversation getting closer to a line that daytime television doesn't always like to cross. And Alyssa Farah Griffin looks like she's about to ask a question that might push the discussion even further. Alyssa takes a small breath before speaking again. You can tell she's choosing her words carefully, but she's not backing away from the conversation either. Okay, she says, looking directly at Olivia. Let's talk about that for a second. The audience quiets again. You said some political figures have deliberately spread misinformation, Alyssa continues. And I don't think that's a controversial statement. It happens in politics. But do you think sometimes the way Hollywood talks about that ends up painting millions of voters with the same brush? Olivia keeps her eyes on Alyssa. I don't think voters and politicians are the same thing, she says. A few audience members clap. Alyssa nods slightly. I agree with that distinction, she says. But when people hear statements like, this movement runs on misinformation, a lot of them hear that as a judgment about them. Sunny leans forward immediately. But Alyssa, movements are led by leaders, Sunny says. And when leaders spread false information, it affects the people following them. Alyssa responds calmly. I don't disagree with that, she says. What I'm saying is that sometimes the conversation becomes less about facts and more about labeling. Joy raises her hand slightly. Politics has been labeling people forever, she says. This isn't exactly new. The audience laughs lightly. Olivia nods. Exactly, she says. That's why I think it's interesting when celebrities get singled out for doing something that politicians and commentators do every single day. Sarah jumps in gently. But I think part of the reason people react strongly is because entertainment feels personal to them, she says. People feel connected to actors and artists in a different way. Olivia considers that for a moment. That's probably true, she says. People feel like they know you. Alyssa adds quietly, and sometimes they feel disappointed. The audience murmurs. Olivia looks back at her. Disappointed because they disagree politically? She asks. Alyssa nods. Yeah, she says. Because they thought someone they admired understood them. There's a pause at the table. Olivia leans back slightly, clearly thinking. I think that's a really interesting point, she says slowly. But I also think it assumes that understanding someone means agreeing with them. The audience claps again. Sunny nods firmly. That's a great point, she says. But Alyssa isn't letting the conversation end there. I'm not saying people expect agreement, she says. But they do expect respect. Olivia immediately responds. I absolutely respect people who disagree with me, she says. Alyssa raises her eyebrows slightly. But do they feel respected when they hear themselves described as misinformed? She asks. The audience reacts again, louder this time. Joy leans forward. But wait a minute, Joy says. If someone is misinformed about something, are we not allowed to say that? The audience laughs and claps. Alyssa turns slightly toward Joy. You can say it, she says. But how you say it matters. Sunny jumps in. Let me ask you something, Sunny says to Alyssa. Do you think politicians always worry about how their words make voters feel? Alyssa smiles faintly. Not always, she admits. The audience laughs again. Olivia looks around the table. I think this is the challenge of public conversation right now, she says. Everyone wants to feel heard, but everyone also wants to be right. The audience applauds. Sarah nods thoughtfully. That's true, she says. But Alyssa gently shakes her head. I think there's something else happening too, she says. Whoopi looks at her. What's that? She asks. Alyssa speaks calmly but firmly. I think there's a growing distrust between cultural institutions and large parts of the country, she says. The audience gets quieter again. Hollywood is one of those institutions, Alyssa continues. And when celebrities speak politically, it sometimes reinforces that divide. Olivia looks thoughtful but clearly disagrees. I actually think silence would reinforce that divide more, she says. Sunny nods again. Yes, she says, because then it looks like people are afraid to speak. Alyssa replies quickly. I'm not advocating silence, she says. I'm advocating more listening. The audience murmurs. Joy chuckles. You're on a talk show. Listening isn't our strongest skill. The room erupts with laughter. Even Alyssa smiles at that. But Olivia responds seriously. I agree that listening is important, she says. But listening has to go both ways. Alyssa nods slowly. That's fair. There's a brief pause. Then Alyssa asks something more pointed. Do you think Hollywood listens to conservative audiences? She asks. The question gets a noticeable reaction from the audience. Some clap. Others murmur. Sunny looks slightly skeptical. Joy looks amused. Olivia takes a second before answering. I think Hollywood listens to audiences in general, she says. But it's also true that the industry tends to lean progressive culturally. Alyssa nods. Exactly, she says. And when one cultural perspective dominates, people outside that perspective feel excluded. Sunny responds immediately. But representation matters too, she says. For a long time, many voices weren't represented at all. The audience claps loudly. Alyssa acknowledges the point. I agree with that completely, she says. Then she looks back at Olivia. But do you think ideological diversity matters in storytelling? Olivia nods without hesitation. Yes, she says. I think diversity of all kinds matters. Alyssa leans forward slightly. Then why do so many people feel like Hollywood only tells stories from one point of view? The audience murmurs again. Joy jumps in quickly. Because people remember the stories they disagree with more, she says. Laughter breaks out again. But Olivia answers more seriously. I think it's a combination of things, she says. Audience expectations, studio decisions, cultural trends. Sarah adds, and social media. Olivia nods. Definitely social media, she says. Alyssa looks thoughtful. But do you ever worry that the industry might alienate half the country? She asks. That question lands heavily. The audience goes quiet again. Olivia looks directly at her. I think the country is more complicated than half the country, she says. Some audience members clap softly. But I do think we should always be thinking about how stories connect with different people, Olivia adds. Alyssa nods. I agree with that. The tension eases slightly for a moment. Whoopi leans back and smiles. Look at this, she says. Two people disagreeing without throwing chairs. The audience laughs loudly. Joy grins. That's because the chairs are heavy. More laughter. But Alyssa suddenly adds something that shifts the tone again. But I do want to ask about one specific comment, she says. Olivia looks curious. Okay, she says. Alyssa continues carefully. In one interview, you said that certain political rhetoric depends on people being afraid and uninformed. The audience reacts again. A few murmurs ripple across the room. Alyssa looks at Olivia. When people heard that, she says, a lot of them felt like you were calling them uninformed. Olivia's expression becomes more serious. I was talking about rhetoric, she says. Alyssa nods. I understand that, she says. But do you see how people could hear it differently? Olivia pauses for a moment. Yes, she says honestly. There's a small ripple of applause from the audience. But then Olivia adds something that immediately brings the tension back. But I also think sometimes people take criticism of political messaging personally when it's not meant that way, she says. Alyssa tilts her head slightly. But politics is personal to people, she says. The audience claps loudly. Olivia nods slowly. That's true, she says. The two women look at each other for a moment. The table is quiet, and it's clear that the discussion has reached a point where neither side is backing down. But both are still trying to keep the conversation respectful. Whoopi glances toward the producer's area briefly. Then she looks back at the table. All right, she says slowly. Now we're getting into the kind of conversation that tends to light up the internet. The audience laughs nervously. And everyone can feel that whatever happens next might become one of those talk show moments people replay online for days. Whoopi lets out a small breath and glances across the table, her hands resting calmly in front of her. All right, she says slowly, looking between Olivia and Alyssa. We're getting into the kind of conversation that tends to light up the internet. The audience laughs a little nervously. Joy leans back in her chair with a grin. Oh, it's already lighting up. Trust me. More laughter ripples through the room. But the atmosphere at the table is still serious. The conversation hasn't exploded into a shouting match, but everyone can feel the tension that's been building over the last several minutes. Whoopi gestures lightly with her hand. Here's the thing, she continues. We've got someone here from the entertainment world, someone from the political world, and both of you are talking about how people hear each other. She looks at Olivia. And I think a lot of viewers appreciate when celebrities speak out. Then she turns to Alyssa. And I think a lot of viewers also feel like sometimes they're being talked down to. The audience claps at that balanced summary. Sunny nods. That's probably accurate. Alyssa gives a small smile. I think that's exactly the tension we're talking about, she says. Olivia nods as well. I agree, she says. For a brief moment, it looks like the conversation might finally settle down. But Alyssa adds one more thought. And I'll say this too, she continues. I think a lot of people who disagree with Hollywood culturally still enjoy the movies, the shows, the art. They just wish the people behind it didn't assume the worst about them. The audience murmurs. Olivia listens carefully before responding. I don't assume the worst about people, she says calmly. But I do believe strongly in certain values, and I'm not going to pretend I don't. The audience claps loudly. Sunny smiles. And that's fair. Joy nods. Everyone at this table does that. Alyssa agrees. Absolutely. Then Olivia leans forward slightly. But I also think it's important to say something else, she adds. The room quiets. Sometimes when public figures speak about issues like misinformation, equality, or civil rights, the reaction they get isn't really about tone, she says. She pauses for a moment. It's about disagreement with the values themselves. The audience reacts with a mix of applause and murmurs. Alyssa considers the statement. That can be true, she says. But I also think tone can still make a difference in whether people are willing to listen. Sunny jumps in quickly. That's true for everyone, though, she says. Politicians, commentators, celebrities. Sarah nods. All of us. Joy points toward the audience. And them too. The crowd laughs. Whoopi smiles slightly and folds her hands. You know what I find interesting? She says. Everyone turns toward her. This entire conversation started with the idea that people feel judged, she says. She gestures toward Olivia and Alyssa. But what I'm hearing from both of you is that nobody wants to feel judged. The audience applauds. Olivia nods slowly. That's true. Alyssa agrees. Very true. Whoopi continues. And maybe the bigger issue isn't celebrities talking about politics, she says. She pauses for emphasis. Maybe the bigger issue is that the country itself is just really divided right now. The audience claps loudly. Joy sighs dramatically. Well, that's the understatement of the century. Laughter fills the studio. The tension at the table finally begins to soften. Sarah smiles at Olivia. I actually appreciate you coming on and having this conversation, she says. A lot of people avoid it entirely. Olivia nods. I think avoiding conversations is part of the problem, she says. Alyssa agrees. Honestly, I respect that you're willing to sit here and talk about it, she says. The audience claps again. Olivia smiles back. And I respect the questions, she replies. Joy looks between them. Look at this, she says jokingly. We solved the country's problems in one segment. The audience erupts with laughter. Whoopi raises her hand. Don't say that too loud. People might start expecting things. More laughter. But as the conversation winds down, Whoopi turns slightly toward the camera. You know, she says thoughtfully, this is actually why we do this show. She gestures toward the table. Different people, different opinions, sometimes a little tension. Joy adds quickly. Sometimes a lot of tension. The audience laughs. Whoopi smiles. But the point is to talk about it, she says. The crowd applauds again. The producers begin signaling that the segment is almost over. Sarah glances toward the camera. Before we wrap up, she says, Olivia, we should mention your new project. Olivia laughs lightly. Yes, I promise I didn't come here just to debate politics. Joy jokes, too late now. More laughter. Olivia briefly talks about the film she's promoting, thanking the cast and crew and encouraging people to see it in theaters. The conversation returns to a lighter tone for a few minutes, and the tension that dominated the middle of the segment gradually fades. But as the show cuts to commercial and the studio lights dim slightly, the audience is still buzzing. Some people are whispering to each other about the debate they just witnessed. Others are already pulling out their phones. Because everyone in the room knows that moments like this don't just stay on daytime television anymore. They end up everywhere. And that's exactly what happened. Within minutes of the segment airing, clips from the conversation between Olivia Wilde and Alyssa Farah Griffin started spreading across social media. Some viewers praised Olivia for standing her ground and speaking openly about her beliefs. Others applauded Alyssa for pushing back and asking the questions many viewers were thinking at home. On platforms like X, Instagram, and TikTok, short clips of their exchange began circulating rapidly. One clip showing Alyssa asking whether Hollywood listens to conservative audiences gained thousands of comments in just a few hours. Another clip of Olivia saying that criticism of political messaging shouldn't automatically be taken as a personal attack sparked long debates in comment sections. Supporters of both women flooded the conversation. Some viewers said it was one of the most respectful disagreements they'd seen on daytime TV. Others argued that it showed just how deep the cultural divide has become. Media outlets quickly picked up the story as well. Headlines described the exchange as a tense but civil debate on live television. Political commentators discussed the moment on podcasts and online shows. And by the evening, the segment had already been viewed millions of times across different platforms. Backstage after the show, according to people who were there, the mood was much calmer than viewers might have expected. Olivia reportedly thanked the hosts for the conversation. Alyssa did the same. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations. Just a continuation of the same respectful but firm disagreement viewers saw on camera, which in many ways made the moment even more interesting, because it showed that two people could strongly disagree about culture, politics, and influence, and still sit at the same table and talk about it. And in today's media environment, that kind of conversation often gets just as much attention as the arguments themselves. Now we want to hear from you. What did you think about the exchange between Olivia Wilde and Alyssa Farah Griffin? Do you think celebrities should speak openly about politics? Or do you agree with the idea that public figures need to be more careful about how their words come across? Share your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the Star Talks for more real talk show stories and the biggest moments from television debates.